Dr. Tara, thank you for joining me. I think it's important that we discuss this issue coming up to International Women's Day. Were you shocked at that headline that came out after that resignation of Jacinda Ardern?
Absolutely, as a psychologist, as a professional, and also as a mother and a woman. So on all levels, it kind of sets this scene that what is exactly having it all, and why should we have to have it all? It's just a nonsensical, outdated term, and I'm surprised it was allowed to be published.
And is it because we're still getting used to women in leadership roles, Tara? Do you think that's why there's still this sort of discussion when a female leader does step down? I mean, I've had this experience myself, so I know that this does still happen. Is it because we're still dealing with firsts, do you think?
Yes, there's something that we refer to as unconscious bias, still very present. I know a lot of people have been talking about, but in newer generations will this turn tides, but there is still a lot of unconscious bias that unfortunately people will make it less about the person and the job, the legacy, the work they've done, and more about gender. You don't get people asking the same questions when male leaders step aside, take a break, or are replaced.
And one of the things I noticed when Jacinda Ardern stepped aside, they got a photograph of her when she'd just become Prime Minister, and then they put one of her when she left, as if to say, this is what being in leadership as a female can do to you. And she did look very stressed in the second photograph, it has to be said. But they didn't reference the fact that, I don't know whether you remember this, Tara, when Tony Blair stepped down, his photograph showed a huge pressure on him as well, but there was no reference to his gender.
Absolutely. We talked about this on the show, didn't we, when we were talking about Jacinda's resignation before, that actually it's so interesting, again, this bias coming in. And what's really interesting as well is you will get the press following these individuals around afterwards, almost looking for evidence to show what burnout looks like, to look at the longer term impact on them. When we think about what everybody has been through in the last few years, anybody who is reevaluating their careers for whatever reason, the impact of the pandemic alone is going to impact people's psychological health and make them review what they're doing for a living. But it's so interesting that the media still go straight in with looking at gender and kind of equating that with not being able to cope.
Yeah, and I think it is very important to remember that period of leadership because, unfortunately, I was there for a part of it as well in terms of the COVID pandemic, because I think when Nicola Sturgeon stepped down, she did reference the fact that she is a human being. She had been through an extraordinary period for Scotland and indeed for the UK at that time. And shouldn't we be looking at the period of leadership rather than the gender of the leader that has had to deal with it?
We absolutely should. So when we look back through history, we want young women, people coming up through their teenage years now, to look at what people have achieved, what they have done, and not to get hooked on a small moment of time. And actually, in a really inaccurate way as well, that somebody stepping down now is actually probably very different to somebody stepping down pre-pandemic. There are so many factors involved in someone deciding to reevaluate their career. Burnout, for example, people are talking about that more, but burnout happens in men, it happens in women, is not gender specific.